Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Factional Fight update from Griffith's car. As you can see, I'm in the car as I am always on every day for so long, and so I figured I'd turn on the video and share with you some thoughts that are bouncing around in my head. Let's start with this week. We got a big update in the weekly news. Bloody Drongo also had a show where he had Retro come on and show a whole bunch of stuff related to the new fishing update, which was, mostly revealed now. And man, does it look amazing. Such an in-depth system. Now this fishing system was mostly developed by Titch. It's her brainchild, and she, since we got the news, the sad news that Titch had passed, the developers had taken on completing that system. It was mentioned that Buddha was the primary developer, taking on the finishing touches of that system. But from what I understand, most of the system was in place. It's mostly polishing up, So we got a sneak peek of exactly what that's going to look like, and man, does it look amazing. It's like super deep, rich, and complex, but at the same time elegant and simple, and it looks fun, especially the spearfishing. So it seems as though your fishing rod has all these slots, like it's sort of you have your rod, you can put a line in there. That line will have you can choose what kind of hook you want, and then you can choose what kind of bait as well. You can choose the type of reel. It's like such an insane little crafting system that I don't think that any other item in the game functions in this way. But if they have the capability of doing something like this, I can see its applications to all sorts of places across the game. But the idea is that you can customize your rod in a particular way to optimize how well you can fish under certain circumstances. So apparently all the water areas have been labeled, whether it's a pond or a lake or deep sea or shallow water or deep water, and each circumstance has the potential for catching different types of fish, and certain rod combinations are better for certain types of situations than others. So yeah, pretty insane. As well, it's kind of awesome how you collect bait. So it seems like you take an awl and you use it up against a shriveled tree, and you can get some grubs, or I think you can get worms from the ground in a similar way. This just such an amazing little system, and I can see it helping out the new player experience, because as a new player, getting food is just super hard. It's not even like it's not that it's tedious or anything. It's really, unless you're scavenging the dead remains of somebody else's kill, getting food is not really that easy. And I remember as a new player using fishing as a way to get meat reliably. That's pretty much all the fishing I ever did, was just right as a new player. Fish was a reliable source of food. Now a new player will have a ton of fun. Just I can only imagine the amount of fun, because really before, fishing was super bland. You would make your fishing rod, and it would you would make it in the same kind of way as any other item in the game. You just like combine a couple items. Oh, you have a fishing rod, and then you would drop the line in, and you would just sit there, and it would be a 2-minute timer, and that's pretty much what it was. It's similar to how meditation is. Now you have to actively respond to the game. So you would see fish, and you would grab onto your line, and the line would bob, and you'd have to react to it. It's a much more reactive game. And the spear fishing, man, that just looks awesome. Just with a spear, you're standing in shallow water, and you watch fish go by, and you have a little target thing, and you gotta spear the fish. Looks amazing. Now combine that with the new water animation that is said to be coming. Oh my god, just amazing. Just looks so good. yeah, I can't wait to see this in game. Now it is clear that there's it's still a little bit rough around the edges, and there's some polishing up to do, but no doubt the dev team is well aware of what needs to be done before it gets released. One thing that they mentioned is going to be added that wasn't shown on the stream was that there was no spearing animation, like an actual and that's going to be added. I think that kind of is needed, because the way it was, Bloody Drongo was trying to spear the fish by clicking on it, and there was no animation, so he clicked on it and it didn't spear the fish, and it's hard to tell why. My hope is that the animation gives you some feedback as to what went wrong. My guess is that there's a combination between where you click and a skill check. That's my guess, to determine whether you're successful at catching the fish. And I think that would make sense, you know, like you aim, so the actual player's skill is the aiming, and then that gives some sort of like modifier to the actual roll of whether or not you are successful in spearing the fish. So as you level up, it'll just become easier to spear fish. But hopefully there's some way that the player knows that that's happening, because otherwise it might feel frustrating in that you feel like your circle was right on top of the fish, you clicked at the exact right time, but yet you still didn't catch the fish, unless you realize that that's because there's an additional skill check. It might appear like it's not letting you catch the fish even though you want to. So I'd hope that they don't, it doesn't frustrate people in that way. And all it would take is some feedback from this UI that tells you that you failed the roll, as opposed to you didn't, you could say something to the effect of you aimed, give you some feedback on how well you aimed versus whether or not your skill allowed you to catch the fish in that situation. Nonetheless, it looks amazing. Even things such as weather and time of day is going to affect the type of fish that you catch, or how successful you are. I think those are it just makes it so real, so visceral. So can't wait for that system to come in. It's definitely going to, convince me to try out fishing and to work on my skill. Now, another thing that was mentioned in the stream that I was really interested in hearing about was that there were discussions of additional features, additional add-on things to the system in regards to sort of like how the system connects with the rest of the game. So as it is right now, the reason why I've never fished before is, there's the partially that it's not a very exciting skill. You put your rod in and you just wait the 2 minutes and then you get a fish or you don't. There's nothing you can do to change that. And there are long action timers and such. But aside from that, there's an additional thing that prevents me from fishing, and that's that there isn't really any motivation for me to collect fish. Fish is used for food. Definitely, that's one thing that you would use fish for, but I can't think of anything else. What else would you need fish for? There's no other resources that is gathered from fish. It's not like you can butcher them and get other materials or anything like that. And for food, I'm personally in a situation where I have more food than I know what to do with. So there's no motivation for me to go out and do any fishing. And I think there was a question asked from the audience regards to this, is there some plans on increasing the number of recipes involving fish? And they did mention that there were plans, that there was discussions, but it wasn't sort of the way that development works is they set a goal for what they want to be developed in the first iteration, right? We want the reel, the rod and the reel, and then the capability of fishing, but they were discussing options for adding on to this at a later time, but then with Tish's passing, then all this is sort of up in the air. So what we would need to see is a dev take on those additional connections to the rest of the game, where you might see more recipes involving fish, or potentially fish providing more resources or different resources that connect to the rest of the game. I think that we do need to see an increase in value to fish. I mean, at the very minimum, an increase to the same level as a regular creature. Because if I go out and kill, let's say, a crocodile, for example, there's a lot of motivation to kill crocodiles. You get the meat, so this is food, but you also get glands for natural substances. You also get leather for leather working, right? There's like a bunch of reasons why you might want to go hunt crocodile. But with fish, the number of reasons is minimal. So, maybe fish oil or something like that would be something that could be harvested. Other things like, I suppose maybe their eyeballs, like you can just add eyes to their list of resources that they can give. I don't know. You can think of some things. I'm sure that there's some things that can be added to just add a little bit more depth and motivation to go fishing. Okay, so fishing looks amazing. The water update looks amazing. But with the water update, there was also another thing there. While the water looks amazing, and the distortion and the waves and everything, there was one thing that was bothering me a little bit. Hopefully it's addressed before it goes live. And that was, there was some... it's almost because of the way the water level works, right? The water level and the land level are such that even in the current system, there's some situations in which the water just clips through the ground and you can just see like a puddle of water there, which is not so bad. Kind of looks like a puddle of water, which is okay. But once you have these waves that bring the water level up a little bit in some places and lower in other places, then what you see is on those low land places is the waves clip right through the ground and just travel along the ground, which is kind of weird. Weird looking anyway. Hopefully they find a way to minimize that or get rid of that. And then the other thing was the way that the water interacts with the shore, like right where the water turns into shore. Similar effect happened where the wave would just sort of travel along the ground in an unrealistic way. More realistically, what would happen is that the wave would come up and interact with the ground in a way that sort of like it resists the water. So the water sort of rubs up against the ground, and it causes the white froth or whatever to form on the top of the wave. So I'm not sure if this is something that's capable, like the worm client is capable of doing. It might actually make it a lot more memory intensive in order to do it, but maybe adding some of that animation, the white frothy animation at the shoreline, just to cover up the connector between where the water ends and the land begins, would add a lot of more realism to that transition. But aside from that, when you're in the water, man, does that look amazing. The water just, such an improvement on the way that it used to look. I'm glad to see it come this far. I remember a time when the water animation had to be like turned completely off, or at least when it was turned off on your client, it looked just like nothing, like there was nothing there. It looked like there was no water at all. And we've come a long way since that. So happy to see that. On to the next thing, which is this weekend. Actually, in fact, it's tonight. I'm recording this one a little bit late because, I started recording another one the other day and got a phone call right in the middle, and it canceled the video right near the start, and I wasn't able to continue it. So, this one's going to come out right before the episode because today, which is Friday, we're going to be recording our weekly stream. And we have a special one for you because Retrograde has invited us to test out the new systems surrounding the new tutorial system. The new tutorial system that we've been really been excited about to hear. There's a lot of hype around it. My hope is that what we see is something that is, goes a long way to improve upon the new player transition into the game. One thing that we know for sure is that they have created a new deed that's on Independence that will act as the starting town. And that starting town will have the ability for new players to interact with it. So it's going to have permissions that allow people to use forges and sleep in beds and hopefully, start out and learn about the game in that village before moving on to their own thing. In addition to that, we did get a little bit of a peek at what it might look like, at least a little bit, on Bloody Drongo's stream, where he typed in some command that brought up the system that's being worked on. Now, on his stream, what it looked like was just a series of pop-ups. Similar to the way that the pop-ups are in the tutorial, but sort of condensed down to the basics. It was kind of funny to watch Bloody Drongo sort of like interact with it, because right away, like, he read the first 2 slides and right away he was just like, click next. He just wanted to get out of it, and it just kept going with like lots of windows. And then there was like a back and forth between him and the devs that I really appreciated. Like, that was a real good segment, in that the devs were trying to explain their perspective on the new player tutorial, and Bloody Drongo was trying to express... What was he trying to express? It was very clear that he wasn't happy with the fact that it was just pop-ups that you would read. Now, I am curious to know whether or not that's exactly what it's going to be. Like, is it going to be the new player comes in and there's a pop-up and they click next, and another pop-up and they click next, and another pop-up, and they just read like these 20 pop-ups? Because if that's the case, I really have a feeling that that's not going to convince somebody, or at least it's not going to, the first impressions aren't going to be there. And I think Bloody Drongo's right in that an average player isn't spawning into a new game, and they're not going to be willing to read through 20 slides. And the reason is because the information in those slides aren't pertinent to that player's position in the game at that moment. Like, for example, one of the slides talked about climbing, right? And turning on climbing, which is an important thing that new players need to know, because, that climbing button is the bane of some people's existence when they turn it on and have no idea that they're climbing, and then they're sort of like walking slow. It's like one of the main things that in CA help people complain about. Like, why am I walking so slow? And then the response is your climbing button on? And they're like, my climbing button? I didn't know that there was climbing. It's like, well, you didn't do the tutorial. Okay, that's fair. But my feeling is that 1 out of 20 slides, one slide saying, there's a button for climbing, a new player is not going to either remember that they read that slide, or they're just going to do what Bloody Drongo did and skip through all the slides, because there's just so much information. And at that moment that the slides are coming up, as the pop-ups are coming up, that's not the moment that the person is ready to hear the information about climbing, for example. They just want to get into the game and get a sense for what it's about overall. So my thoughts was that these pop-ups are great, except for I don't feel like they need to be like in a sequence right at the beginning, but rather they should be contextualized. Under a certain circumstance, then the pop-up comes up. Like, I know they have that system where it's like the Book of Wisdom that has those sorts of things, but sort of integrate the two together, where, let's say the person is trying to walk up a steep slope, for example, and if the game detects that they're trying to do that for the very first time, or, maybe it's a matter of like, there's an option to have the tutorial help pop-ups come up. So a new player will have these pop-ups come up contextualized, and then they have the option at any point to just turn them off if they want. This is kind of like how most games seem to do it. And then if the game detects that the person is trying to climb or walk up a very steep slope and it's like steeper than normal, they can't really get up there, then the pop-up comes up telling them about climb. You know, in that moment, the player is ready to hear about climb. It's like, how do I get up this thing? Oh, there's, and then the pop-up comes up and says, if you would like to get up this thing, hit the climb button, right? Because up until that moment, the person had no need for that information. So they're not going to like remember it when it gets told to them. You need to give them that information the moment that they're ready for that information, or the moment they're questioning it. So I really like the pop-ups, but I feel like they need to be more contextualized, and they need to be like the initial pop-ups that the player should get should be as minimal as they need. Okay, so for example, they'll need, I kind of argue this, but there is the first pop-up which says you move with WASD and you look around with the mouse. Maybe that one kind of needs to be there. Although I don't know how much really needs to be there. Like, most people know that when they go into a game that that's how you control the game. And so maybe, like, could they do something like this? There's no pop-up at the beginning telling you how to move, but if the player is not moving for, like, you know, a good few seconds, like there's no movement, then the pop-up comes up or something like that. But the moment that the player starts using WASD and the system can tell that the player understands how to look around and stuff, then that pop-up just doesn't come up, because I'd say that 95% of people don't need that pop-up. Do you know what I mean? Most people know how to move around the world. So if you can reduce the number of pop-ups that are going to be not well received by the player, then that would make the tutorial system that much more engaging. Only put pop-ups that the player really needs and has questions about, right? My feeling is that the first pop-up should be go somewhere and do something, you know? The first pop-up should be you can go forage by going over to a grass tile, right-clicking on it, and click forage. This will gather you materials. You can gather lots of materials from foraging. And then the player goes and does that, and they get the materials, and they wonder what it's for, you know? And then, I don't know, something that indicates to them that they can find out what each of these things are for by looking up on the Wikipedia, you know? And then I really do feel like you don't, I don't know what it is, but I don't really feel like you need to bombard the person with a ton of information all at the beginning. That information should come slowly but surely over time. And then give the option for the player to turn that off if they don't want it. You know, because some people don't want that. Now, one thing that the devs were mentioning is that they don't want the tutorial to be hand-holding, which I partially agree with that at some level, that a player who is the type of player that would be, you know, the person who would like to play Worm is the type of player who wants to do a lot of the research on their own, the legwork on their own. But sometimes a player who's willing to put in the legwork but is encountering a game in which they can't decipher what to do. Like, it's frustrating because they're I want to chop this tree down, I just don't know what to click or how to click. I had that experience with another game that was very similar to Worm. I can't remember which game it was. But there was a game that was similar to Worm in that you can, you know, build and craft and gather, but I was having such a frustrating time with trying to figure out how to do things. You know, I would click on things and I would try, like, in my mind, I want to harvest this thing, but every time I click on it, in whatever combination of stuff I click on it, I couldn't get it to work. And there was no tutorial to tell me how. And Worm, I would argue, has a similar kind of thing. Like, in order to chop down a tree, you have to know that your hatchet has to be activated. Like, most games don't have that feature. So a new player who's, let's say, trying to chop down a tree might be doing all sorts of things, trying to take their hatchet and click on the tree, trying to put their hatchet in their hand on their paper doll in order to get it equipped. They could be doing all sorts of things that is not going to contribute to chopping down the tree. So, for example, if a person is going up to a tree and starts trying to click on a tree for the very first time, it should give you that pop-up. You know, like in that moment. It could, or potentially the tutorial could lead the player to say, you know, go chop down that tree now. You know? And then the player's like, okay, that's what I'm gonna go do. I'm gonna go chop down a tree. Hopefully. But I really feel like the other option is better. Don't show anything until the moment the player's like trying to click on that tree. And then give the pop-up. Oh, you're trying to chop down this tree? To chop down this tree, you activate a tool. Okay, and maybe at the very beginning, there's one of the pop-ups talks about activating. In order to use any tool, you need to activate it. You activate it this way. But sort of like have a thing to do in that moment. So try activating your da-da-da and do da-da-da. And that could be like try activating your hatchet and right click on the, you know, a tree or something like that. Or try activating your shovel and clicking on the ground, you know. So that's my thoughts about the tutorial. We'll discuss this in further on today's episode. I also hear Joella is going to be there because she's designing the tutorial city, the tutorial village. So yeah, excited to see all this come into the game. So anyway, I think that's everything that I wanted to discuss today. I really hope that you guys come and tune in to today's stream, and if you're not able to make it, you can always watch the VOD, or I'm going to upload it also to YouTube, so you can have your option on how you want to see it. So until then, I will say goodbye, and yeah, keep on worming, guys.